Good morning.
Good morning.
Let me first introduce myself properly. My name is Jonathan Hirschfeldld, and I'm a painter. And in the last 15 years or so, it has been my conviction that it is not so cool for artists to spend their time in the studio producing artifacts and then transporting them into the hands of collectors and museums and galleries, and that it might be a cooler thing to do, to participate in the creating of the art world in which you live, in taking part in the history, theory, philosophy of art, and also in the financial and pragmatic aspects of the art world. I was one of the founders of the artist-run gallery Hanina in Tel Aviv, and I've been writing in Haaretz, the תרבות וספרות הארץ about art, and I've been writing for several online magazines. And I felt that it's important that artists should steal the discussion about art history and art philosophy from the white, pale hands of academics and into the rosy cheeks of artists. That was my conviction. So I have been giving about 100 lectures a year about history of art in Tel Aviv Museum, and I've been writing all over. What we are going to do today, is this my phone? Is this your phone?
It's not our phone because we've switched them off.
What we're going to do today is we're going to speak about the return of the Jews to history. We're going to do this through art, and this lecture will have 3 parts. The first part will be a theoretical discussion about the nature of art. That is, if we want to understand how Jewish art came to be and what I mean by Jewish art and why is this important, why this has so much to do with return to history, and what does it mean to be a people that are not taking part in history? What does all this mean? We have to understand. The nature of the work of art. The other thing, the next stage in the lecture, I will show you some late medieval and early Renaissance Haggadah drawings, and then we're going to dive to the really interesting and controversial and outrageous part of early Zionism and the 19th century Jewish art in Europe. By saying that Jewish art in the diaspora, by Jewish art in the diaspora, I mainly mean Europe, I already say something that is a little annoying for some people, because they may say, what do you mean diaspora is Europe? There are Jews in China and the Arab countries, whatever. But as you will see in the next few minutes, the discussion on art, the discussion of the history of art has something that is deeply rooted in the history of Europe, and the return to history and the discussion about historicism of art has something deep to do with Europe. So there is a nice lecture somewhere about Jewish art in the other diasporas that are not Europe, but it's not this one. And those were the numbers for the lottery next week. They missed, don't tell them. Okay. So let us just begin with a swift definition of art. I would like to say that there are a few classical definitions for the work of art that we have to take off the table. For instance, the famous art is mimesis. Art is about imitating life, is about creating images that look like stuff in the real world. I would like to take this off the table because most of us have seen thousands of works of art that has nothing to do with mimesis, abstract art. But even Renaissance art, what do you think? Like the Sistine Chapel, something, did anybody ever seen God in the lilac tunic flying diagonally into like this is not mimetic of anything. So art is not mimesis. Also,
Mimetic?
mimesis like making a imitation, mimesis. Like making imitation of real life. The other definition of art that is very common is that art is about expressing feelings. You know that Tolstoy used to say that all art is expressing feelings, and the only definition between my book, War and Peace, and The Crying of a Baby is quality. I do it better. But in terms of the essence, we do the same thing. Well, I think by now we have all seen many works of art that are not expressive at all, that are very subtle and and very intellectual and cerebral, that has no expressive faculty in them. Lately, in the 20th century, we have seen a theory of art that is called the institutional theory of art. George Dickens, Arthur Dato, for example, are proponents of this theory. And this theory says that a work of art is something, no matter what it is, with no intrinsic qualities of its own, that has become a work of art simply by participating in the institutions of art. For instance, if I take this cup and I put it in the museum, which is an institute of art, it's art. If art students learn about it, and art collectors collect it, and critics critique it, and the museum exhibit it, it's art. There is no intrinsic magical quality to objects in the inner fibers of their being that makes them somehow magically art. It's just the function in a series of institutions, students, collectors, money, whatever, that makes them art. This, I think, and this is my opinion, you don't have to you don't have to buy this, but this is not it. This is, I think, is the worst theory since the invention of the theories itself. Like, since the first theories, since the word theory was first used, this is the worst theory ever. And the reason for it is...
What's going on? Traffic. Jeez.
We were given the wrong advice about what room.
No traffic. No
so much traffic today.
That's not the excuse.
It's okay. I only gave the most important information of their lives in the last 5 minutes, that's all. So, the reason I think institutional theory of art is so bad is because it answers all the questions about the work of art that we don't care about, that has nothing meaningful to say to us. Let's take an example. What is your name, sir? Can I ask your name?
Don.
John?
Donald.
Don. Okay, let's say I want to give you an institutional theory of Donald, okay? And I write on the board all the information about the institutional participants that Donald takes place in his life in the institute of, he's paying taxes, and he has a social security number, and the institute of marriage, and the institute of friendship, and the institute of shalom, and the country club, and everything, and I map his entire life, his schedule, his everyday schedule, and every part that it takes place in any institution it takes place, I put it on the board. And you guys will tell me, listen, Hirschfeld, you made a wonderful theory of Donald. We understand how he works, where he goes. But Donald will tell me, listen, man, you missed everything that's important about me. The way I loved a woman when I was 25 and I ran after her in the bus in the rain, and that my father once told me, son, this will all be yours. And all my wonderful memories, and the magic that is me, and the fingertip, and the fingerprint of God on the clay that He made me, and the burning flame of the essence of my soul, and my dreams and my fantasies. None of this exists in your theories. It's just so the same about art. An institutional theory of art describes everything we don't care about. Who cares? You go to a museum, you see a huge Jackson Pollock, you are excited. You're in awe with the fantastic power of shamanism and machoism and wonderfulness, and you think, oh, somebody bought this in this date, and it costs so and so money, and who cares? I mean, it's who cares? So, what I would like to do is to give you another theory of art, which will be the one that we use in this lecture to explain Jews returning to history, and what is Jewish art, and why is it so important, and why is it such a big part of Zionism. This theory of art suggests that art has about 5 or 6 things that make it different, that differ it from artifacts of beauty, of ornament, of ritual, artifacts of religion. And it was actually a slow process by which art divorced itself from the production of artifacts. And about 5 or 6 things differ art from other objects. And these things are European. They happened in Europe. The first is that these works of art differ from artifacts by the fact that they have authorship. Somebody made them, they have an author. Somebody signed them. The medieval art, the Byzantine art, the Otoic art, the Carolingian art is anonymous. Nobody made it. Sometimes it was made by Saint Bartholomew. Sometimes it was the Torino shrouds that actually touched Jesus' face, and sometimes it was miraculously done by all kinds of magic. But it was magic and mystic and mythological beings, but nobody made them. But when somebody says Giotto painted it, we have a birth of date of Giotto. We know where he lived, what he did, and there's authorship to his work. So it's completely different. Also, if you are working in an African tribe making masks, you have no name. The mask is not your authorship. You are producing the same mask. Authorship creates the second thing that differs art from other artifacts, and that is historicism. Meaning you have things that are on a, I would say, on a scale of history. You can period them. You can say this is late Giotto, this is early Giotto, this is Raphael is much later. There is a process, there is evolution, but there is no evolution in African masks, tribal masks. On the contrary, most tribal artists would like to produce the exact same mask their ancestors did. They have no sense of historicism. So once there's authorship, there's historicism. But once there's historicism, a new thing appears, and that is, I would call it, I'm using here, by the way, this is not Jonathan Hirschfeld's theory. It appears in a wonderful book by Hans Belting that's called Likeness and Presence, The History of the Image Before the Era of Art. It's a huge book, this thick, and if somebody breaks into your house in the middle of the night, you can hit it in the head. And nobody ever read this book except the writer and his own mother. But because she has to, it's her son, what's she going to do? But not read this book. But anyway, the punchline is very famous. So what happens is after you have authorship and historicism, you have a new thing that comes to mind, which is a utopic, I would say, horizon. Utopic horizon means some kind of point to which all artists aim, some kind of goal that unites all artists. For instance, if you are in the early Renaissance, this point might be the better description of the human body. Everybody is trying to get into a perfect description of the human body. And this makes utopic horizon makes it possible to put different artists on a scale, on a ruler, to measure them. And it is possible in the history of art to say, Raphael is better than Giotto. Giotto is better than Masaccio. Now, today, to our postmodern sensibilities, this sounds outrageous. Nobody is better than anyone. Everything is the same. The kids are running in a school contest, but the one that got last also gets a medal. You know how these things. But to art history, this meant a great deal, that you can compare things. They have an utopic horizon, which is the better description of the human body, the better description of volume volume of the fabrics, and the space, the inner space of the illusion of space in the painting, and they wanted to make it better, and they did make it better. So there was an evolution. So Michelangelo was better than Raphael, that was better than Giotto, that was better than Cimabue. Okay. But then, comes another thing, which is the last and most important thing in our little list of what makes art art. And that, let me suspend you.
Suspension of disbelief.
No, and that is, the last thing is that the artists that once you have authorship and you have historicism and you have a ruler to measure the utopic horizon, you have a certain thing that we will call autonomic discourse. The autonomic discourse means that art has become a discourse like agriculture, like philosophy, like religion. The autonomic discourse of art rises in early Renaissance in Europe, and it doesn't rise in China or in the Middle East.
No, it's okay, it's okay.
So what you have is...
Take seats. Sorry, Jonathan. What's the matter? Why don't you take seats? Take seats now. Okay.
So what you have is that art is not universal. Not every culture make art. The Chinese, the Japanese, the Indians, the Arabs, they all make artifacts of beauty and of ornament and of ritual, but what they don't make is an autonomic discourse with an utopic horizon of authors. This is unique to, I would say, early Renaissance Europe until the 20th century. So this is the background on which we have to see. What?
The third point is, the last point is?
The last point is an autonomic discourse.
Meaning what?
So what was the fourth point?
Which is like, okay, I will explain autonomic discourse because this is truly important. When Giotto paints, he has something to say. He gets paid by the church and he has a commission work, but he has something to say to other artists. His main motivation is that other artists will see how he makes volume, how he advances in the creation of illusion of space. There's an autonomic discourse between artists, which is like the autonomic discourse of theologians about religion and of agricultural science. And like the rising of science and the rising of art is the same thing. It's about closing and differentiating them from other discourses. Mind you, that in the late medieval time, science did not differentiate itself from magic or religion. It took a slow process of differentiating and making it an autonomous discourse. So this is truly important. I'm going to use this little painting by Jean Fouquet to make the point about the beginning of art. This is the Madonna of Milan by Jean Fouquet. Art before this looked like this. This is Byzantine Madonna, which is anonymic. Nobody did it. It is made to look exactly like others. There's no history to this. It happens nowhere on the golden background. This woman is just it's just a general Madonna, and it has something to do with religion and very little to do with art or expression or authorship or autonomic discourse. But what happens here is weird. You see, this Madonna has something to do with a lot of things that have nothing to do with the Madonna. She has to do with sex, with her tight hips and very, very round tits. I mean, I've never seen anything like this in my life. She was, and I've seen some, and also breasts. Okay. Also, she was the king's lover. So Jean Fouquet, this was like the middle of the 15th century. He was an illustrator of books. Most of his works look like this. Illustration, very late medieval style of books, like getting the commission, delivering the illustration of the text, not having his own style expressed, not having his own agenda. But here a completely different thing happens. You see, the person who financed this, who bought this, who commissioned this, was the guy who's in charge of money in the kingdom. What do you call him? The minister
The treasurer.
The treasurer, yes. So he was in love with the king's mistress. So he paid Jean Fouquet to paint her as the Madonna. Now this is perverse. And she has a lot to, you know how they used to shave their hair to be more beautiful in the 15th century? So this has to do with her being the lover of the king, but the treasurer in love with her. It has to do with gossip in the kingdom. It has to do with her being sexy, with her hips, with her breasts. It has to do with everything except Biblias per poem, Bible for the poor, except illustrating the text, except doing your commission. This is an autonomic discourse about volume, about perspective, about illusion, about personal things, about the secrets that only a few people in the kingdom will know. So this is Huizinga, who wrote a wonderful book that's called The Autumn of the Middle Ages. Dedicates few beautiful lines to this painting, saying that for him, this is the point where the Middle Ages end. This, here. He says, here we no longer have the sense of religious, of holiness, of fear of God of the Middle Ages, of the medieval times, but the secular kind of naughtiness, which is Renaissance already. Okay, well, ready to begin. We have the background for our conversation. And the second part, I said there's going to be some parts to the lecture. The second part is this one. We're going to see some illustrations for Haggadah from Europe. Now, I'm going to try to make a weird and somewhat controversial statement about the history of anti-Semitism and the nature of the Jewish religion. I hope it goes well. I would like to say that in a weird way, there's a connection between anti-Semitism and chauvinism, male chauvinism. The connection is like this. At the middle of the Middle Ages, the Jews looked to the Christian rural population as not masculine. There was something about the Jew that looked like a female. He does not walk the field. He has no suntan. He sits in a room and reads books. So the feminine Jew has become a combination of male chauvinism with anti-Semitism. And this is important because it has its roots, it sends its roots, or it works its way into one of the most horrifying aspects of anti-Semitism, and that to some places, and I read this in Daniel Boyarin's book, the idea that Jews use blood for matzot in Pesach is rooted in the idea that Jewish men has menstrual periods like women. They lose blood because they are so feminine. So they need blood from young children. So this is very important for the rest of our lecture because I'm going to show intense preoccupation of Jews with these aspects. And I deeply recommend you to read Daniel Boyarin's books about sex in the Talmud and what all these books where he gives his acute observations on the topic. So I'm going to show you some drawings of women as they were drawn in the Haggadah. Now this should astound you for two reasons. One, it's astonishing that people drew in the Middle Ages because there is a direct and not like it's a very obvious command, thou shalt not make pictures. It's like it's a famous command, don't make pictures. And nevertheless they did a lot. And it should astound you once more because there are a lot of women in these images, and we have grown so accustomed to modern day religious Jews being so afraid of the image of women. They spray it in bus stations and they cut it from and they can't see a woman, they go like this in the street. But these people were not less religious. They were medieval Jews. But they thought there was nothing wrong with portraying women. So this is important to see. So This is a woman reading. It's the Darmstadt Haggadah from the 15th century. This is a bathing woman, 15th century Haggadah. This is a bathing naked woman in a Haggadah.
Wow.
This should blow your mind.
Yes.
Definitely. Because we have grown so accustomed to think that the only form of Judaism is the one that is Eli Ishai, that we have forgotten that Judaism is very wide and there's all kind of... Actually, I have to say, if there's a word I hate is the word Judaism. Why? Because it pretends like the Jewish religion is one of few isms. Like there's communism and fascism and Judaism and whatever ism. And I think this is wrong. Because Judaism is not an ism. You don't go to the ism store and choose what ism you want and buy Judaism. The Jewish religion is something that you are born into. It's like your skin color. So you can go to church and try to not be Jewish, but someone will point at you and say you're Jewish. So I think it's a little, I don't like the word Judaism. So from now on we'll use the word Jewish religion. So the Jewish religion is very diverse, and there are all kinds of things that are Jewish religion. And not this Eli Ishai form that you cannot look at women and think that there's an earthquake because of homosexuals and whatever. So, Haggadah, 15th century. This is an androgynous, a woman with a penis, in the sister Haggadah from Spain, 14th century. Now, androgynous is taken from Plato's Symposium, where Plato suggests that in the beginning, men and women were created as one, stuck to one another, in such a fashion that pleasure was non-stop. There was a closed circuit of pleasure, and
Wow.
men and women were closed in a circle of pleasure, and evil history cut them in the middle. And since then, all our lives, Plato says, we feel that we're missing a half. So we are looking for another half. Because we were cut originally. So it's a beautiful metaphor. Anyway, this is androgynous 14th century Spain. This is the creation of Adam and Eve from the Sarajevo Haggadah, 14th century. So, I mean, this is bold even to 2019, I would say. There are naked people and they are funny looking and they do all kind of stuff. This is Rebecca in the Beit Midrash. It's from Nuremberg, 15th century. And it's also important to see how feminist this is. You see how feminist this is. A woman studying Torah in the Beit Midrash in the 15th century. Now somebody has put it in our mind that women should not learn Torah and whatever, and that you know, this common, our image of religious Jews today, but this is relatively new. This was not what Jews were like in Middle Ages and Renaissance. They had an image of Rebecca, Rivka, studying Torah, independent, debating Torah. So this is crucial for us to see. So if let's make the entire claim more round. So I claimed the roots of anti-Semitism has something to do with chauvinism, and there's an innate connection to feminism, to asserting the female body, to positing him. Positing, is that a word? Making it positive. Positing the female body, presenting it in a positive fashion. Yes. There's a connection. And we will see that this goes on and maintains until Zionism, until the beginning of the state. There's a deep-rooted feminism, a link between feminism and the Jewish religion. This one is called the Dragon Haggadah. I don't know why. This is Rebecca getting the blessing of Jacob. This one I love the most It's from the 14th century. And so this is Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh. She's finding Moses and her naked, for some reason. They shouldn't be naked. Nobody said, it doesn't say in the Bible naked chicks in the river. But for some reason, you can see them through. Now this is important because an actual effort was made to make the transparent effect of the water and the see-through of the, and this, what is sex? How something becomes sexy? If she was just naked, she was just naked. It's medical. But if she's naked, but you see her through water, you know this couple, they finish the date and they go to, and he is escorting her to her house, and she says, do you want to come up for a cup of coffee? And he says, I don't drink coffee. And she waits for a second, and then she says, I don't have coffee. Why did she say come for a cup of coffee and not come upstairs and rip my clothes? Why did she say that? Because this is not sexy. It's sexy if she says come have a cup of coffee. So the one thing that hides, so this is very erotic. This is very Renaissance. This is very, you can see authorship. You can see trying to make more of advancing in the utopian horizon. You can see this is closing on art. Not yet, but closing. This is the women hit by lice in the Haggadah. You would think men suffered from lice too. But somebody thought it would be more interesting to present women. These are women cleaning for Pesach. Of course, from our standpoint today, you might say, oh, chauvinistic, presenting women working in the cleaning and whatever, menial jobs. But you should see this in the eyes of a 14th century Haggadah. This is amazing. Women deserve to be represented and honored for their part. This is amazing, I think. Dancers. Now we know the name of the name of the illustrator. His name is Yoel ben Shimon, and this is from Florence, 1478. So there's historicism and authorship, and this is a woman naked with talit. A woman naked with talit. Now, if I were to paint this today and exhibit it today, I mean, seriously. Seriously, somebody thought that a naked woman in a talit is not offensive, but nice and holy. And he was right, I think. I think it's nice. Okay. I'm going to use this image. I'm going to use this image of Teddy Hirschfeld, which is a Polish artist, not Jewish, to bridge between the two parts of the lecture. So the first part was about this. We had like a definition of art, and then we had some medieval Haggadot and early Renaissance, and now we're going into the real serious stuff, 19th century Jewish art. But I want to use this painting by a Polish non-Jewish artist to just stop for just a second and say something, that although 19th century Europe was anti-Semitic and Jews were burned and chased all over, there is a huge body of work by non-Jewish artists that is hugely respectful and loving of the Jewish communities that lived between them. And this is one example, but there are many. This is a Polish artist painting Simchat Torah, where the kid is dancing in front of the rabbi. Jews are not presented in any anti-Semitic manner. They are nice. The synagogue is not dirty with money lenders, but it's nice, and the Torah is nice, and the Jews are honorable, and there's a genuine happiness and the fascination with the other, the fascination with the exotic other, the fascination with the exotic other neighbor, the neighbor. And we should remember this, because another thing we should get rid of is this idea that the entire history of diaspora was anti-Semitic persecution. There was also a huge renaissance after renaissance of creations, and Jews were living with good neighbors and had prosperity and created. So there's also this. Okay, we are ready to start the lecture. This was all like in 5 minutes. Okay, so this is the beginning. I'm going to show you a few artists that walked in the 19th century, and I don't want to bother you with the date of birth and death, but if it's really important, and after the lecture, okay, I will give you the... This is Joseph Israelis, is famously known, aka the Jewish Rembrandt. He's a Dutch painter. He's mostly famous for these pictures of the missing father. You usually see like this mother standing in the window waiting, a mother and two children on the beach waiting. Always the father is missing. We can read this in two, I think, ways. One is that it was an actual theme in Dutch life. The fathers were away on sea and on voyage. But we can also see it as a Jewish question about the missing father not coming. So we are alone. And Israelis have no shame in his Jewishness. He's not hiding it. He's not converting into Christianity and pretending he lives a Jewish life. He paints Jewish themes. This is a Jewish wedding. He paints it with a Rembrandtesque love and humanism, with this warm brushstroke and gestures of a Dutch master. And I think this is immensely important for us for another reason, and I will come back to it later, because Israeli artists are being taught from the very beginning of their career that there's no history of Israeli painting, of Jewish painting in diaspora, and all Israeli art should be always abstract and childish because we have just become a nation and there's no history and we're starting from scratch. And it's important that we will remember that these people lived and made art and they were successful and achieved. This is Isador Kaufmann, also middle of the 19th century. And once again, there's an intuition in you that says, oh, Hirschfeld, who cares about these paintings of rabbis? Who cares about those shofarot and pomegranates and people crying on the kotel? This is not art, it's kitsch. Let me remind you, this is the middle of the 19th century. This is not what you see today, like in Jerusalem, where there's the galleries for American tourists that sell shofarot painting in $5,000 because they will pay, like it's not this. It's almost a Raphaelic painting in terms of the illusion and quality of work. And there's a beautiful, beautiful sensitivity for a painting within a painting. And the machine that creates meaning, the meaning-creating machine of European painting is being annexed into Jewish life. The meaning-making machine of European art, of Raphael and Leonardo, is being used for Jewish life in the middle of the 19th century. So Isador Kaufmann may look to you like another Yiddishkeit painter of pomegranates and rabbis, but it's not. It's actually quite revolutionary and quite cool, and I would say. Beautifully painted beard and the expression on his face. But this was all actually just a warm-up, just foreplay for the real thing. This is the real thing. This is Maurizio Gottlieb. Maurizio Gottlieb, the James Dean of Jewish painting in the diaspora, died only 23 years old. Maurizio Gottlieb, Maurizio, it's like Maurice, it's like Moses, it's like Moshe. It's Maurizio, it's Polish for Maurice. Maurizio Gottlieb, one of the most hugely influential painters of Jewish life, and everywhere, and one of the most gifted and unique painters in the entire 19th century, including everyone else. not only Jewish painters, one of the most important painters. And he lived a short and stunning life, and we're going to see some of his images and study them a little more deeply. This is the dance of Salome. As you remember, Salome was Shlomit Hodus's daughter. She came up to St. John the Baptist and she said, "Do you want to go up to drink coffee?" And he said, "No, because I'm holy." And sometimes, when women suggest for a person, when a girl says to a guy, "Come up to drink coffee," and he says, "I don't want to," she gets really insulted. Sometimes. The opposite direction, not so much. When a guy says, "Come up," and she says, "No, here I understand, this is how life," sometimes they don't want. But girls sometimes get really offended. In her case, she was so offended, she came to her, she went to Hordus and she said, "Listen, Abush, listen, Daddy, can I have his head on a silver plate? Please, please, Daddy." And they cut his head off. So she dances for her father here. She's a stepdaughter, it's kind of. But listen, before anything else, let us see the work, the brush strokes. It looks like Delacroix. It looks like it's so impressionistic. It's so, the gestures are so thick and so wonderfully made. I mean, where have we ever seen a painting of such erotic power and suggestive and power of composition and everything? I mean, where have we ever seen this? It's unique to the 19th century, notwithstanding the fact that it's a Jewish artist. Maurizio Gottlieb is a genius of portraits. Some of these portraits were hung in the Tel Aviv Museum until recently. I have a huge piece of gossip about what happened to them, but I can't tell it. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I overheard in the museum because I woke, but I can't tell them. So anyways, they are no longer in the museum today.
Well, thanks for letting us know that.
Yes. And this is a portrait. It used to be in the Tel Aviv Museum. It's a wonderful painting of a woman. Look how she is concentrated within her thoughts. She looks like a person who has a soul and a mind and memories and childhood. And this is very Rembrandt-esque.
Wow.
This is his teacher, Jan Matejko. And this is Rafi Lavi. This is Israeli art. And
Which school did he come from?
And let me explain, please, let me try to explain why is this so important. Israeli art has a myth, as an ethos, like every other art. The ethos of Israeli art is something like this. We came here, a people with no land to a land with no people, and we have given birth to ourselves. We were born from the sea, from the ships that brought us here. And our art cannot look like the art of Europe. Our art cannot look like the art of church. We cannot make representation because thou shalt not make. And we cannot have rich materials because we are poor. And we cannot have the adult, oh, I'm so adult. We have to paint like kids because we were just reborn. And we have to do it on cheap materials like plywood and plywood. And we have to sketch like kids. And we have to stick pieces of commercials into the plywood. And everything has to be done in a manner that represents Israel as a new country, a country of rebirth, with no memory, with no history. We have pressed the button of reset on Jewish history. We have started again. We are the only people who have given birth to themselves, that have cut themselves from the Jewish people think of themselves like the sleeping beauty in the legend that have slept for 1,000 years. They were kissed by modernism and awakened awakened, and came to Israel, and they are now young, old, but young. I mean, they are old because 1,000 years, but they slept all this time because they didn't take part in history. I'm reminded of the Jewish philosopher Franz Rosenzweig, who was very suspicious of this theme, and Rosenzweig opposed Zionism, and his idea was that that as long as we are asleep, that we don't take part in history, we have superpowers of ethical stance. The superpower of the sleep, of the ahistorical superhero. We can be Gershom Shalom, and Rosenzweig, and Kafka, and Walter Benjamin, and Theodor Adorno, and Karl Marx, and Kafka, and we can, and Maurizio Gottlieb, and we can be this thriving, what do you call the thing that you put in the dough that makes it bubble?
Yeast.
Yeah, we can be the yeast of the dough, you know the thing. But once you will awaken us, and we will return to history, Rosenzweig was afraid that, like in one of those Indiana Jones, when you awaken a mummy, and immediately from it becomes a skull and die, we will jump these 1,000 years and grow immensely old rapidly, and in 2 seconds we will have an army, we will conquer another people, and we will be chasing kids in the streets and shooting them, and we will be an oppressive nation of ourselves, and we will miss out on the ethical superpower of diaspora. So Rosenzweig was very suspicious of this, but he was a minority, and the majority of Jews thought there is a huge promise. There's a huge promise of rebirth in Zionism, and start pressing the restart button. So Israeli art will look like this for a long time. And it will look like this because the story that we have no history was told again and again and again. There's no Jewish art in Europe. We are starting from zero. But there is Jewish art in Europe. This is Gottlieb's self-portrait. This beautiful man with his very Jewish face, somewhat proud of his Jewishness, with his little beard that is not growing right, you know, and the eyes that are, the thick eyelids are falling on them. My father has this thing, and the thick lips. He has some melancholy to him. The color of his skin is somewhat more tan than the usual Jews. Listen, his grandfather's generation were shtetl Jews. They never saw anything outside the shtetl. But his father was a merchant. He went all over the world, and he gave his kids, sent them to school. We will hear another story about Gottlieb's school soon. Another portrait by Gottlieb. This is his palette. This is another self-portrait of Maurizio Gottlieb, this time in the guise of Achashverosh, as a Parsi king, with his earrings and the red background. Once again, I would like to put this conversation to the theme of femininity. A very feminine guy. He takes no shame in his feminine aspects. I've been reading a lot of Jung lately, and Jung says that the problem with chauvinists that they deny the woman inside them, because Jung says there's an anima, a woman part of every man, and if you're not in peace with it, then you hate it, then you project this hatred toward women. So I would say Maurizio Gottlieb is the kind of man that is really in peace. There's a very feminine, gentle, thick-lipped, with earrings and gentle-faced. Look at this. Wow. This is a painting of Daniel da Costa. For those of you who do not remember the story, Uriel da Costa was the guy, when Spinoza was a kid in Amsterdam, there was a guy who was rebellious, and they made him, he went out of religion, and he wanted to come back to religion, and they made him lie on his back in the entrance to the synagogue, and everyone that came to pray wiped his feet on his belly. So it was this guy that he had a laver, whatever. Anyway, so this is Uriel da Costa, now retrospectively becoming a hero for Gottlieb. And this is one of the most important paintings by Gottlieb. The painting of himself as Jesus in the temple. Whereas the priests are saying to him, thou shalt not make images, whatever. Gottlieb is addressing a non-Jewish audience. In this way, I would say Gottlieb is very reminiscent of Kafka. Like Kafka, that was Jewish in a non-Jewish community, who wrote in Germany, but he was living in Prague, that had no kind of earth underneath his feet. He was nowhere at home. So was Gottlieb, who was Jewish, but he lived in Lithuania, and then he went to Paris, and he painted for non-Jewish, but he painted Jewish themes. He was like this person who was never at home. And his self-portrait as Jesus is maybe meant for his non-Jewish audience to think, wait a second, our God is a guy pretty much like this guy. He was a Jewish guy, our God, and he had like this little beard that is not growing right. And also you can see how Gottlieb is identifying himself with the suffering of Jesus Christ. As a suffering young man with identity problems and feeling that he's an outcast. This is a sketch for a Jewish wedding.
Wow.
This is a girl, I think, in a Cleopatra costume. And this is the very famous painting of the Yom Kippur prayer. Now, this is an immensely complicated painting, and I'm not going to teach it completely right now, but I am suggesting that you will find, if you have the time, an article that I wrote about it a few months ago in Haaretz, if you can read Hebrew. Anyways, so it's called Yom Kippur, and it's a triple self-portrait. It's a triple self-portrait. He appears 3 times, once as a little kid, once as an older boy here, that you don't see, because I cut it, and here. And he's wearing a very exotic talit, and he's hungry because it's the end of the Yom Kippur fast. And I think one of these women is his lover, that he rejected him and didn't want him. And the story goes like this. Gottlieb has a childhood memory that he was supposed to go to, I think, Vienna to study art, and he went, and he was in this school that was teaching all kind of general knowledge, and they said, okay, early September we're going to do some painting, and we're going to have a painter come and give some classes, and he was very excited. But early September it was Yom Kippur, and he had to go home for the holidays, and he was like 14 or 15 years old, and he decided, no, I'm going to stay and paint. And he painted, but he made like this emotional link between the painting and the sense of sin, that he was sinning because he was doing it on Yom Kippur. And this, I think, this painting, I think, is his way of saying, listen, I did this, but I did this to glorify thy name, to bring the beautiful of Jewish life into the front, so people will see how beautiful, what a beautiful, because who else is going to paint Yom Kippur if not a Jewish painter that is sinned in Yom Kippur to study? I mean, who else? You know how symbolic systems work. In every symbolic system, the one thing that represents the system is outside of the system. I mean, the most German person in Nazi Germany was born in Austria. The most French person in Napoleonic France was born in Corsica, he was Italian. And the most Christian man in Christianity was a Jewish rabbi. So if you see, and the most Jewish person in Judaism was an Egyptian prince. So if you symbolize a system, you stand outside of that system. And for Maurizio Gottlieb to symbolize the system, to be the one guy that represents the beauty of Jewish life in diaspora, he has to be the one guy who took that one lesson on Yom Kippur. And there's an immensely important and beautiful detail in this painting that is usually overlooked, and that, I don't know if there's a detail here, yes, thank you, that the inscription on the Torah is for Ilui Nishmato, for, how do you say Ilui Nishmato in English? For
soul.
For naming of his soul, whatever, in the memory of the soul,
Sanctification of the prayer.
yes, of the dead Maurizio Gottlieb.
Wow.
So he appears in this painting as a kid, as a teenager, as a grown-up, and as a dead person who has contributed money to have a Torah named after him. He died, and he lives as a memory on a Torah. This guy that did not go home for Yom Kippur and study painting. So I think it's the entire story of Jewish diaspora in one painting, in a way. The next figure in our little voyage, I think, is the most amazing one, and the least known one. And this is a painter that it's a privilege for me to be the one that makes your acquaintance with him. This is Simon Solomon, who was dubbed by Dante Gabriel Rossetti as the greatest Pre-Raphaelite painter of his time. He was a friend of Oscar Wilde. He was a homosexual who was arrested for homosexuality and incarcerated, and actually was given, I think, manual labor and actually died from that. I don't remember the details, but I think. No, he was released afterwards, but he never returned to paint. And he's until this very day hugely familiar in England, because for the British people some of his images have become so iconic. And he's important for the theme of this lecture, about the link between the Jewish religion and affirming the femininity. And this is, of course, David and Jonathan, right? David is playing the... Yes. But this is a homosexual metaphor. For those of you who do not get metaphors, let me... Just kidding, I'm not going to. But you can understand, right? So, okay. Simon Solomon, who's also a middle of the 19th century artist, worked with the Pre-Raphaelites. Some works,
Work with the what?
the Pre-Raphaelites.
Pre-Raphaelites. Okay.
Yes. These painters felt like Raphael in the 16th century ruined art by making it too clean-cut, too austere, and they wanted to go back to some medieval ornamentality and abundantness and religious sense. And these paintings with all kinds of flowers. This image is so famous, I think every English school kid know it. It's like on the papers, on the books, you know, on the notebooks of the kids. It's like this melancholic angel. For us today it looks kitsch, but you have to remember how radical this was for a Jewish painter in these circles to create such unique erotic, I would say homoerotic even, imagery. Religious themes. This woman, you know, this is the woman. She's the one from all the Pre-Raphaelites art. She's the woman from Dante Gabriel Rossetti. She's the one from Millet. She's the one who's. They were all in love with her. There are huge stories. She posed for Millet's Ophelia. She's floating in the midstream like this. And this painting killed her eventually because she got an pneumonia from. Because he made her pose for him in a tub, and it's England, it's cold.
Wow.
Anyway, this is from Shir HaShirim. These are metaphors from Shir HaShirim. And okay, so this is interesting. This guy, I think, I'm suggesting, I don't know, but I'm suggesting. Okay, you don't have to buy my interpretation, but I'm suggesting this guy is living the normal life with this woman. Oh, well, so normal, heterosexual, whatever. But his hand. So I'm thinking this, the circle of Avery Beardsley and Oscar Wilde, some decadent Art Nouveau streaks. Anyways, so these are very unique works of art. The Angel and the Philosopher.
All Jewish artists?
These are all Simon Solomon.
Oh.
These are all him. Okay, so these are the stories of Jonathan and David. There are all kind of detailed parts of the story. He's playing, he's running, he's hunting. He was very interesting in the story because of the famous line, your love was more precious to me than the love of women, that Jonathan says to David. David to Jonathan, sorry. And what's important for me is to show you that we have returned to illustration. We have returned to illustration of holy text, but once again, it's the Jews have come to have awakened to history, and they are taking the holy text and illustrating it, but now they have authorship, now they have utopic horizon, now they are making art. Now this is art. Okay, now to early Zionism. This is the last chapter of our lecture. Early Zionism. This is Shmuel Hirschfeldld, the eternal Jew. Who is the eternal Jew? He's an old man running in a graveyard for his life. Because what is Europe if not a graveyard for Jews? What is Europe if not a forest made of crucifix? The eternal Jew, like Kafka and Maurizio Gottlieb and Simon Solomon, is a person who has no ground under his feet. He's always running. The ground is burning underneath his feet. He's old, he's hysterical, and in a painting that has some kind of quality of a prophecy, that prophesies the mountains of bodies of Auschwitz, the terribleness, the idea that life is too horrible for Jews. And in the middle of the 19th century, where the celebration of youth is Europe is obsessed with the celebration of youth in the middle of the 19th century. It's Goethe's Werther. It's everybody's about, it's Nietzsche's writing about youth, about affirming life. It's everything about the late 19th century and the atmosphere of celebrating body, and this is the atmosphere of Europe. And then Hirschfeldld says, listen, we are old, and this is not our place, we have no ground. This painting was exhibited in Bezalel Schatz's first school in Bezalel in Jerusalem in 1904. It was exhibited in a room that was called the Room of Tears, where rich donators used to come, stand in front of it and weep. Weep for the destiny of Jews, for the history of Jews, for the life of Jews, for the history of persecution of the Jews. Hirschfeldld actually came to Israel. He was here less than a year, and he died because it's warm here.
Too hot?
It's too hot, yes. And now we are ready to begin the lecture. Our lecture today will deal with art Jewish art in the diaspora and early Zionism, and our lecture begins with this statue, the statue of Matityahu Hashmonai by Schatz. The history of the life of Boris Schatz is amazing. I don't think there's ever been a life story similar to it. He was born as a shtetl Jew in some hellhole, but he rebelled and he went to Paris and he learned with the greatest teachers of his time art. And then somebody in the dismantling of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, somebody created a new state, called it Bulgaria, but the Bulgarians had no folklore because they were not people actually. So the new king of Bulgaria, which was deposed from outside, who was probably a German person, decided to create a Bulgarian art school that will create authentic songs, authentic napkins, authentic art. And he brought artists from all over the world to create this school. Schatz was there. Schatz was in Bulgaria, and even today when you will go to Bulgaria and to the village and the old ladies are making designs of napkins, the designs are Schatz's. And he made it. And he learned that there is a huge connection between creating a new people and making art. Art that comes from the heart, enriches the heart of the people, and echoes their history. And there is no Zionism without art, because the program of the Jewish people returning to Israel cannot be to make tanks and banks. We are not here to make more army and more money. We are here to get a cultural rebirth, to make this a center of studying the Torah and creating values and creating art and literature. This is the only essence of Zionism. And he understands this deeply in those years that he's working in Bulgaria. In the meantime, his wife fell in love with a young 19-year-old student and ran away. And he was brokenhearted and alone. And he returns to Paris and he makes the statue of Matityahu Hashmonai, crying his famous cry, Mila Adonai Elai, who's with God, come to me. And this is once again the old Jewish person. But what kind of old person it is? It's an old person with might, with strength. He's stepping, you cannot see it here, but he's stepping on the body of a dead Greek person he just murdered. And he was photographed on a painting of clouds to make him more... we don't have the statue anymore, it was ruined. And I think the king of Bulgaria bought it, and then in one of the wars, he melted the bronze to make cannons, or cannonballs. So anyways, the statue is no longer, but it was immensely popular, and these postcards were on the refrigerators, in every house in Eastern. There are no refrigerators, I know, but they hang it in every house in Eastern Europe, and it was motivating people to come to Israel. And Schatz became a adherent Zionist, and he was enthusiastic about this project of coming to Israel and have a chance for the Jewish people to give birth to themselves, to have a death in the diaspora and rebirth in Israel as a new people, a creating people, a people with culture, with art. And he establishes the school of Bezalel. Wait a second with this. I want to go somewhere else. And you know what? No, let's go back. Okay. There was a reason why it was made like this, I think. Okay. So what was Schatz's Bezalel? What was the school that he founded in 1904? Well, it was three things. One, it was a factory. It was a factory in which a unique group of designers, Schatz, Zeev Rabban, Lilian, and others, made designs, and Yemenite Jews made artifacts. The Yemenite Jews are a constant in the equation of Jewish history in Israel because they were always here. And I don't know good enough history. I don't know the history of Yemenite Jews good enough to make the point. But they were here when they came. In 1904, when the Schatz came, the Yemenites were here. And they were Zionists, and they loved the country, and they were silversmiths and goldsmiths, and they had great hands, and there was nothing to do with them. So they gave them designs to make. This is a mirror with Jacob and Rachel, Yaakov and Rachel. It's a beautiful, beautiful artifact. The design, I think, is by Zev Rabban. And this was one part of Bezalel. It was a factory to create artifacts by design that were sold, and the money brought back to the factory and make it self-sustained. The other thing, it was a museum. It was a museum where there was like the Room of Tears and whatever. And the third thing, it was a school of art where these hugely important artists that came from Europe to here tried to raise the new generation of artists that will create a culture with a folklore for the new people that is getting rebirth here. So this is one. This is the Chair of Eliyahu. I actually saw it. It's in Milwaukee Synagogue from some obscure reason, I don't know why. But I was in Milwaukee for a completely different reason, and I saw it. And it's amazing. The design is both Schatz and Rabban together, and the carpentry and the whatever silver smithing was done by workers. And it's hugely beautifully made. It's an amazing piece of work. Okay, so the last part of this conversation has to do, once again, with eroticizing the project of Zionism. You must understand, this is the most important point of early Zionism, that the crowd, the audience, the target people, the one that you target with the product of Zionism, the people you want to sell Zionism to, are young kids in the shtetl that are 18-year-old, 19-year-old, and if Zionism will not be erotic prospect, they will not come. They have to choose between a future in the shtetl when they will get married to a certain Shifra Pua and will only have sex in the dark for 5 minutes as she stares boldly in the ceiling, or they will come to Dgania and Kinneret and be chalutzim and will wear short shorts and will have love affairs in the sun, and Rachel HaMeshoreret and they will lie in the hay and roll in the hay and whatever, and everything will be exciting. Zionism has to be sexy. And one of the most important projects of eroticizing Zionism in 1904 is making Theodor Herzl an erotic hero. Now, I will show you a few examples of this before we leave. The first I want to show you is the conversation between Schatz and Herzl, as it was published in Ost und West magazine that was very popular in Eastern Europe at the time. Schatz publishes the discussion. I will read in Hebrew and translate to English. Schatz says, I will read in English. For a complete hour I lectured my thoughts to him. He asked to know everything by detail, and I talked. And the glory of his Hebrew ideal face made me excited. And on his forehead, that was clear, I have read the deep thoughts within his sage, dreamy eyes. I have seen the soul of the gentle Hebrew soul, which is the soul that sees worlds in fantastic measures and feels the realities of that is bitter, the bitterness of the current reality. Well, he said, Herzl, we will do it, but resolutely. After a stop brief, he said, what name will you give to this school of yours? Bezalel, I answered him, after the guy who made the desert the temple in the desert. Temple in the desert, he replied after me, Herzl, mechanically, and his beautiful, sad eyes looked to some endless horizon as if he felt that he himself will not taste this. So Herzl is being described by Schatz with an emphasis on his beautiful eyes and his wonderful Hebraic forehead and deep thoughts as a very erotic person. The entire tone of the discussion is like he was actually interviewing Marlon Brando. The idea is that, and when Lillian came to Basel to see Herzl, and he took this very famous picture, "My back hurts," you know, I have to, listen, I have to rest my back. Lillian's idea is that he needs to portray Herzl as an ideal, sexy Jewish person looking to the horizon. It's not the feminine weak, it's not the Jewish of the shtetl, it's a new, life-affirming Nietzschean Jewish person. Now I'm going to give you a piece of gossip that's going to blow your mind. But I have to just give a little warning that I don't know this for certain. This is not a fact. But there are stubborn rumors that when Lillian took this picture, he also took about 5 or 6 naked pictures of Herzl, posing like this. The reason is that we have a letter from Herzl asking him to destroy the pictures. And there are stubborn rumors. We also have evidence for these rumors from the paintings Lillian made with beautifully naked Herzls.
Wow.
This is a naked Herzl. For those of you who thought when they woke up this morning, today is not a day in which I will see a naked Herzl. Okay, so surprised you did. And you have to understand that making Herzl into an erotic hero is not trivialities. It's crucial for the project to succeed. It's crucial because you have to understand that Europe is inviting these kids to leave the shtetl and to move to Paris or London or Warsaw and live promiscuous lives. They have to have a deeper and more attractive vision in the Chalutzim. And I suggest that you will, if you have the time, read Boaz Neumann's book on the Chalutzim, because Neumann shows that actually this really happened. Life in Dgania and Kinneret in 1910, 1912, 1920 was really
Hot.
Yeah.
We know.
There was action in the hay. So here is an erotic Herzl. Lillian was basing Herzl's image on 3 things. 1, on the naked pictures. 2, on the image of Ashurbanipal, the Assyrian king from 8th century BC, that makes Herzl linked to the roots of the Middle East. He's actually a mythical figure. Herzl is not important as a Herzl. The person Herzl is not important. The mythos of Herzl is important. You have to sell people a legend. Herzl himself died of syphilis. Nobody in his family actually became Zionist and came here. No. His children committed suicide and whatever. It was a horrible story. But Herzl is not important. The myth of Herzl is important because the myth drove people to leave their houses and to come to Dgania and Kinneret and to dry the swamps. So this is the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, 8th century BC. And of course, Moses. Of course, Moses. Herzl needs to be Moses. He needs to be Moses because he's delivering us from slavery into freedom. So the final image that we get from this project is this Bruce Willis, Ashurbanipal, Moses Herzl. This bodybuilding prophet of our redemption. And I know that the last 10 minutes are for questions, so I will make this one last point. What I wanted to show in the journey that I took you from the definition of art to medieval Haggadah and 19th century Jewish art is I wanted to make a point about the importance of erotic issues the Madonna of Milan being so erotic, the Haggadah being so erotic, Herzl being so erotic. The importance of erotic issues for political issues and for identity issues. And I wanted to show how the definition of art as something that has to do with history. There is it's not the fact that art and then somebody writes art history. Once somebody writes about it, art history, it retroactively becomes art. Art has deep, intertwined roots into the idea of history. And for Jews to return to history, to wake up from their sleeping beauty mode into a historical nation that is creating itself anew in its homeland, for this to happen, it had to happen with art, and the art had to be erotic. That's all. Thank you very much.
Jonathan, how did Chapter